Carlton King is a former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for Special Branch in a jihadi organisation. My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy Podcast, the show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security, and armed governmental personal protection operations. But actually, those who know about what we do on the show, what we actually do is look first and foremost, and in its widest and furthest, and also narrowest perspective, we look at geopolitics, the thing that affects us all, from how nation states are affected by each other, to basically how individual citizens affect each other, the politics of everything. And last week, I looked at an issue within my critical thinking perspective. And I'm actually going to continue looking at a perspective that relates to what I call critical thinking. So let's say what that is. So our critical thinking aspect on the show is actually to put to you, the listener, various perspectives of a certain issue. And we look at it, and the whole idea is for me to put out ideas, and hopefully for you then, maybe to go away and think about them, maybe to watch TV on such issues, maybe to read books on such issues, maybe to read, I was going to say newspapers, but again, one of the biggest issues we have presently is that a lot of the aspects that I do within critical thinking come about because the, if you will, mainstream mass media is not giving you the correct view of life. It's giving you a sponsored view by the state in which we're in. And when I say the state, I don't mean the people, I mean the ruling elites. And those ruling elites can be not just the government, indeed oftentimes it's not. It can be other countries' government's view being pushed upon your government, and then you're told how you should think. It could be big business, and then you're told how you could think, etc., etc., etc. Whoever's, in a sense, has bought out the politicians in the land in which you're in, if they're not telling the truth. If they're telling you the truth, there is no problem. It is the truth. It is what it is. Whether you believe in it in terms of you believe in the route and the road which the government's taking is either here nor there. It's, it is what it believes and why it's doing it. And with some idea of democratic principles, whatever those are, because we looked at democracy last week and hence you'll know why I'm saying this. With some idea of democratic principles, it could be that you voted for it in a roundabout way, because you read the manifesto of the particular party which you put in power before you voted for them, didn't you? You know you never read the manifesto, and the vast majority of people never, ever, ever do, or never, ever will. And they depend upon that. So they're going to give you headlines of a manifesto. So you voted on it, and you brought these people in, and now this government, whatever what country you're in, is doing what you suggested it should do. Okay, fair enough. So you could say there's a democratic, bourgeois democratic, pseudo-communistic democratic, whatever view you want to look at the world in, there's a democratic perspective to it, they can argue. Only you will know as a citizen whether your country is actually carrying out some element of democracy or it isn't. From your perspective, of course. But I'm trying to say, even if it isn't from your perspective, then, a country can still be carrying out a democratic mandate, but just not your mandate. So that can be the case. And I'm not now talking about people who are fooled and they're fooling the public because they know nothing. So first they give to the public a view and then they take that view back in terms of a vote and say, well, you voted for it because, we gave you the view you give it back. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about where an educated mass of people decide, yeah, this is what we want to happen. In other words, you have an educated, what should we say, an educated mass of people in your state, an educated electorate in your state, a school system that educates people to understand everything, etc., etc. If that's the case, then what's your argument if you choose a democratic way to run the state? So that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about here is a proclivity for the powers that be through the media, and indeed the media, because it's symbiotic, isn't it? It's not the powers that be telling the media, it's not the media telling the powers that be. Oftentimes it's a duality of both, probably run from the person at the top of that media chain, the owner, who has a particular perspective and says, that's the perspective that we will push. And therefore, if you want to work for me, these are the stories that will come through. And if you don't want to work for me, these are the stories that you won't get through. So work somewhere else. So what I'm saying is, all in all, before I've even started talking about the subject, is that when you listen to me, I'm hoping you're listening with the perspective of, I hear what he's saying, I'll check it out to make sure it's true, and I'll look deeper into the subjects that I thought were a foregone conclusion. So today, actually what I want to speak about is the United States and the loss of empire, but I want to put it on a very specific perspective. I want to look at Greenland, and I actually want to say that Greenland, as a country, in terms of it being, if you will, partially self-ruling entity under the Kingdom of Denmark. Going back to the old days when Denmark had quite a few colonies, some in Europe, in the Caribbean, one time some in Asia, and therefore was an imperial state like Britain was an imperial state. And one of its few left possessions is Greenland. And the Greenlanders, some of them say they want to be free from that and have said so for years. But we're led to understand that it's a minority, and I possibly think it is. And then you've got the majority who are happy. See, I was looking for a different word than happy. Who are content to work with it as it is right now. In other words, to being a part of Denmark and run by it. Now, why do we mention this? Because unless you've been living under a stone, you will hear that President Donald J. Trump has said he wants Greenland for the United States and that he'll get it. And like the old cop story, he said, we can do it the easy way or we can do it the hard way. Now, according to him, the easy way is we'll pay Greenland to take it over and it'll become one of the United States states. Right? That's the way he said it. The hard way is nothing's off the table. And by that, he means military, especially when you get the Secretary of State for War. Notice the Secretary of State for War, not for defence anymore. They call it in the United States for war, and that's a purposeful aspect that he's done because he wants to show the might of the United States. So the War Secretary has said, yep, we can do it the hard way. So there you go. It's not really hidden in any way. What he's saying is, if we don't get it I like to use this word, so I'll say it this way. By hook or by crook, we will have Greenland. So if we don't get it by paying for it, we'll get it by military activity. Now, I'm kind of thinking, and I don't want to put my head on the chopping block, I'm kind of thinking that the military way won't be the way that it'll be done. I'm kind of thinking that. But with President Trump, I can't basically say that's not going to be the case. In other words, I guess what I'm saying is, with President Trump, I can't rule anything out. He could decide that the military route is the route to take. Now, why do I say all this and why do I say it in this way? The problem for NATO is that Denmark is a NATO country. Now, the reality is that NATO is really, or has allowed itself to be, ever since its inception, to be fair, vassals of the United States. And I'll say it again, and I know it sounds bad, but I'm going to be very clear. And you know me, those of you who've been listeners, I'm not hiding anything. Vassals of the United States. Now, as far as the United Kingdom's concerned, and I'm an Englishman, we have used it to project power above and beyond our status post the Second World War and the loss of empire. Of which I guess, at its latest aspect anyway, I'm an imperial product. And I stress always that the only black people in Britain are not, if you will, babes of an imperial product. They've been there since the Roman times. So that's not to do with colouring or anything like that, or race. It's to do more with where one's latter ancestry comes from. And I note the word latter because, you could have an ancient ancestry that was from Britain. So the imperial project meant that Britain, from basically being the largest empire the world has ever seen, brought itself in and in and in and in and in and in and in until effectively you're talking about it being solely the United Kingdom and various overseas territories, be they in Europe, be they in Asia, or be they in Africa, or be they in the basically central to South America, the Caribbean. Now, as time has gone on, and we are as we are today in 2026, those have lessened to actually very few. Bigger places like Hong Kong have gone. Some of the small, they're all small in the Caribbean places have gone. I guess you could say Jamaica's the same size, so gone in the 60s. Practically every one of the African elements went in the 60s. But by the way, I should stress that particularly places like the African ones, whatever, these didn't go without a fight. Britain just didn't turn around and say, oh, you can go. No, these people had fought for their independence, and Britain wanted to hold on to them because these colonies were, in fact, paying for themselves. And indeed, as I explained the other day, a colony that didn't pay for itself was of no worth. So they were. You can talk about Ireland, and the North still clings on. One of the places in Europe still clings on as part of the United Kingdom, Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Gibraltar still clings on. But, most of the places that, obviously Bermuda in the Caribbean, most of the places are gone. So the point I'm saying is, why do I mention this? How do British politicians then, who are used to thinking on a worldwide perspective, how do they fall the necks in, and think, oh, you know what, we just bother about Great Britain now. That's it, because that's all we are. No, what you do is you create a Commonwealth, and you pretend that you rule the Commonwealth, but we know it's another angle from which we can potentially have some power base, because the king or the queen, depending on who rules in Britain, has still got the titular head of some of these countries because it was easier for them not to change it. So therefore, we can, albeit the British state doesn't run these places, we can have the titular head like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, some of the Caribbean states, etc., etc. Although we don't run them in any way, shape or means, the fact that we're still tied to them via a king or a queen, no king, obviously, means it gives us some leverage. It doesn't really give us any leverage over the countries, to be fair, but it gives us some leverage in the international circumstance, and more importantly, at home. Because what we pass at home is a misunderstanding that the Commonwealth basically means empire. When it doesn't. It means nothing of the sort. It doesn't mean Britain controlling it in any way, shape or means. But we kind of push that out. So people kind of think that at home. because we don't educate them to the politics of our country in any way, shape or means. That's our big problem. We don't have political lessons. We don't talk about what our constitution is. We don't talk about anything to do with political perspectives in the United Kingdom. I mean, say what you will about the United States and about the lack of knowledge of the average US citizen who is solely interested in the United States. At least they do have an understanding of the political arena in terms of how the politics of the state, the constitutional politics of the state should function. Should function. Notice I use that word. And I say that because, every US citizen will be aware about the difference between the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive. They'll all be aware of that, and they know what these elements of government are. I think we'd be hard-pressed in the United Kingdom to understand that. I don't think, actually. I know it. If you talk to the average person coming out of school, where the US citizens learn this in their school, the average Brit coming out and you say, what is our system? What does the judiciary do? What does the executive do? And how does that differ from the legislature? They won't have a clue what you're talking about. It'd be a foreign language. And that's our problem in Britain. But this is bigger than Britain because we're talking about geopolitics, so it's the world. So why does that matter? Because when I'm talking about Greenland, I would imagine that the Greenlanders have a perspective of how Denmark is potentially positive for the Greenlanders, because that's the education they've been given. Because, of course, they've been given the education by Denmark and not by the indigenous Greenlander. So that's why I'm mentioning this, because this is how it's played. It's about the state putting forward its issues. Now, why do I mention all of this? Because the United States is extremely good at the first instance of regime change. Now, notice I say the first instance of regime change. And the reason why I'm saying that, because, I'm coming from a secret intelligence background, right? And regime change is pretty much normal about how intelligence agencies aid the power of the state, whichever state they belong to actually aid and assist that state against foreign powers or systems to, if you will, improve the state for which they are working. And that could be through the economic well-being of that state. So it's the United Kingdom, the economic well-being of the United States. So that means aiding our companies to get, the best out of it so we can sell goods, etc. That may be through seeking out those who would do harm to the country from an external perspective. So understanding the militaries of other countries, understanding the intelligence services of other countries, the security services, how you can get inside them, the police services, if the police and security services are different. In most states it's not. So therefore, understanding how all this functions, understanding terrorism and could that be used by another state, etc., etc. This is everything that, intelligence agencies' jobs, roles are, regardless of where you are in the world. And one aspect is regime change. If you're ordered to do so by your state, make it so we can change how that country's system works to the advantage of ours. That's what an intelligence service does. And, just jumping slightly away, we're talking about Iran now, and we're seeing the demonstrations and the riots in Iran, etc. Right? I have no doubt whatsoever that those systems are fully and nigh on totally orchestrated by foreign powers, primarily the United States and Israel, and potentially we ourselves may be playing in that game as well. I won't talk too much about us because I just won't. But I'll talk about the United States, I'll talk about the state of Israel. They clearly are working within Iran to cause havoc. And because that's what agencies do, at the behest of their state. So, you can see that's what's going on. Now, before that, there is a long road before you get in there. Now, often the way the United States has done it is it's simply said, because it basically was the most economically powerful country in the world, and not to use the word was, because China is probably that now, most economically powerful country in the world. But one thing China doesn't have is the reserve currency, which is the United States does, which is a dollar. So basically everything's done in dollar, less and less and less now. This is what the United States is getting frightened about, of course. So you have to deal with the US dollar no matter what, which then makes the United States powerful enough to say, we will sanction you and we will lessen the fact that you can utilise our dollars, in a sense, or make it difficult for you to function within our economic systems, which they run, by the way, and have since the end of the Second World War, and Chatham House. So really what you're basically saying is, we, the United States, can force other countries to sanction you. So that's part one, oftentimes, of how it works. So example, to bring this home to you, let's use this example. When, after the Iran-Iraq war, when Saddam Hussein was originally, during the Iran-Iraq war, Saddam Hussein was, if you will, the greatest friend of the United States. Why? Because Iran was its greatest enemy. Okay, so they give to Saddam everything. He got everything that the United States wanted. But the moment that the war was over and Saddam was beaten, and then Saddam was bankrupt and Saddam was looking for some more monies from somewhere else, and he went to a one-time province of him that we had cut off, we, the United Kingdom, had cut off from them, which is Kuwait. And he said, I want it back. And then tried to bring it back via military arms, which he knew the United States could see. The United States then, as the only world superpower, decided, we'll let him take it and then we'll take it back. Now, if you want to know about that, read my book, Black Ops, The Incredible True Story of a British Secret Agent. If you read that book of mine, which is about my life story, you will see that at some stage I was around those sort of regions and I was working around those sort of regions, and I had put to me what the United States wanted to do in terms of Iraq. So I'm speaking from experience here. And if you read the book, it'll explain to you. I won't go into it now. I'll explain to you how that came about. But the point of the matter is that the United States wanted to change regime from Saddam. He was no longer doing what they wanted him to do. Now, functionally, they'd done that. Many. If you look at it, a book's come out recently. It talks about the 89 different regime changes of the United States. Well, they've done that in those years that I'm talking about. Quite often they did it with Noriega. Noriega was their man down in Panama and helped them work in South America against Contras. And then again, when he got too big for his boots, wanted to do something for Panama itself, they basically took him out on drugs charges when the drugs were flying in there via the CIA to go into the United States so they could pay for their weapons to go into against the Sandinistas. So again, you can look that up, you can read my book, whatever, and you'll find out about some of those aspects. But the reality of the situation is that once you've been used by the United States and you're no longer of use, you can find yourself as the leader of a country that's been of use on the bad list. And the reason why I mention this, it's because what happened with Saddam was that he was then on that list. And so they sanctioned them. And one part of the sanction was that they couldn't get medicines for children. In fact, for anybody, but, obviously it plays better when you say children. But the reason why I say all of this is that, of course, in the West, we weren't saying they couldn't get medicines for their children, because that wasn't something to say. But one journalist actually said to Madeleine Albright, who at the time was the US's Secretary of State, Foreign Secretary was in the United Kingdom, he said to Foreign Secretary of State, do you think it's right that 500,000 Iraqi children have died because we, the United States, have basically put sanctions on them, which has meant that they can't sell their oil in the abundance and they can't get the monies that they require in order to provide certain medicines for children, right? And Mrs. Albright said this, and what it always kind of foxed me, because I thought she would have turned around and said something like, well, what Saddam chooses to spend the rest of his money on is up to him. He's got enough money to do this, 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 and this. I thought she might have said that, but she didn't. She didn't. And I think in a moment of clarity for her, or maybe a moment of arrogance that the United States at this stage was the only superpower in the world, she said, I think the loss of 500,000 children is a price worth paying for freedom. Yes, I left a bit of silence just for the position. So in other words, what she's saying is, the loss of 500,000 children, yeah, it's, it's not our children, so be it. And our sanctions are doing that. But the point was that the sanctions were designed to make everybody angry. And the fact that people are losing their children will make mothers and fathers angry. And then they'll come up against Saddam and try and throw him out. So I mention this solely because that is what is at stake right now in Iran. We have put sanctions on the Iranians. We have caused real strife in Iran in terms of its economic situation. And then the hope is that you bring fizzes within society and you bring people out onto the streets. And the people there onto the streets are saying, we want a government that is able to feed us, able to give us what we need, able to give us our medicines, etc., etc. Now, it hasn't been working the way they wanted it to. So what they've done is they've been training people down in Albania, MEK, which is a terrorist organisation. Well, man's terrorist and man's fiend. I guess we'll call them fiend fighters. They're going to call them terrorists. A terrorist organisation. They've been training people in the Caucasus in some places. And basically, cut long story short, these people have then been brought in to Iran, and I believe some Baluch have as well, from Baluchistan, have come in, and because all these different groups are fighting for their own perspective on what they think Iran should be, not overthrowing the state, and it might even be a single issue like we want the Baluchis to have more power, or we want to run our own state, or we want to break away from Iran, or whatever it might be. So what you do is you heat all these people up, you put them onto the streets, and Iran recently came out with statements where it said they've actually got the intercepts that say that the CIA is saying to the people, yeah, attack the police, shoot them in the face, make it dastardly, and if possible, if you can't get the police, shoot other people around, just make people angry, and that way we're going to get the demos going, and we're going to heat the demos up, and before you know it, we'll have revolution in Iran, and then, you'll have done your job, and then we'll come and aid you. Now, the Iranians say they've got that info. I suggest they've got those intercepts probably with the aid of either the Russians or the Chinese. And so they were willing to put them out in the UN and say, these are the intercepts. Look, I mean, check all this. Don't listen to me. Check it up. As I say, I always check stuff up. So the reality is that what you're doing is you're fostering strife. You're then giving people the reason to jump up and shout and say, we want to come against the state. And then, if necessary, you're putting in your own people. I mean, we've done this before. We did it with Mazadek, who was, in 1952, the democratically elected, and we accepted that, we, the United Kingdom, that is, accepted he was democratically elected. The United States accepted they were democratically elected. We were more powerful then in those days, accepted they were democratically elected. But the problem is, when he came in, the first thing he did is he said he wanted more of his oil for himself, for his own country, not for himself, actually. He was a true Democrat, left-leaning, but a true Democrat. And he said, we want the oil for us, so we're going to give you a lesser percentage. And the oil companies went mad, and Great Britain went mad, the United States went mad. It was Anglo-American oil, etc. And so therefore, they've gone mad, and they've gone to the powers that be at the time. As I said, where does the power come from? Right? And the powers that be said, yeah, okay, we've got to get rid of this fella, Mazadek. So a coup was put in place, and all of these aspects that I'm saying to you now were done at that time. And he actually stood down rather than have a lot of his people killed. So And then it never went back to being democratic. So that's what happens. And it's a well drawn out path. It's been used forever and a day. And frankly, it's been used in Italy by the Americans. I had a thing called Gladio. If you look that up, Gladio, I'm not going to go into that, just stay behind. It's been used in many other countries, where in Greece, wherever, where people thought that leftists could come in, particularly in the Cold War, and done. And on the other direction, British people do not forget this, which is why people in the special branch were looking at individuals. This same type of thing was going on in Britain from the eastern countries, attempting to cause fizzes and problems within our society by causing problems wherever they could, to say that our country's system should have been overthrown. It's not just the West. It's universal. It's what intelligence agencies do, right? It's universal. It's what it's all about. But some have a proclivity to do it more, and I think the US has a much more of a proclivity to do it than many other countries, because it felt itself as the power base in the world. Or maybe it's because of the Dulles statement, whereby they said after the Second World War, we utilise 6% of the world's energy and we must keep that circumstance the same. So maybe in attempting to keep that, and attempting to be by far the most powerful country in the world, that it actually felt that it had to change systems all around the world. Maybe that was. Why do I mention all this and I'm talking about Greenland? Well, because, and I'm going to put it to you this day, mark my words, you will start, I don't care what country you're in, you will start seeing programmes about Greenland and Denmark, and you'll start hearing indigenous Greenlanders say, we were treated horribly, which they were. We were sent to schools in Denmark to reorientate us to be Denmarkans rather than Greenlanders. We were told to be more European orientation than indigenous. They sterilised some of our women without us knowing. You can go on and on. All the stuff that was being done in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, with the local and indigenous peoples, that was done with the enslaved peoples or the offspring, the children of enslaved people, when having high birth rates was no longer any good because you didn't want blacks there. So in South America, Central America, all these type of things that were done to try and, if you will, get rid of a populace that was no longer wanted. And the settlers in those countries wanted to take over and didn't have the fear of others who didn't look like them being a threat to their survival. So all of these things that were done in many other countries were done in Greenland. There's no doubt about that. But you never heard about it. But now you will. This is the point I'm making, because this is the start of that first aspect that I say to you. It won't come in the form of sanctions. You see, it won't come in the form of sanctions. It'll come in the forms of TV manipulation, radio manipulation, mass media newspaper manipulation, all this stuff. And it'll come in the form of, your government is allowing for Chinese, Russians to get in here and take what they shouldn't be taking. Oh, they're trying to destabilise you. Oh, if you believe in staying where you are, it's because you're a Russian lover, a Chinese lover, whatever. All this type of stuff will come in. This is basically psyops at its best, and it's done very, very well. And so this will happen, and then what you'll be shown is how much better a life you can have if you follow the US. When we had 9 bases here, because the US did, look how better you lived than how you're living now, when we've only got 1 base. Now, the fact that they've not got 9 there is because the US dragged its own soldiers out. It's not because Denmark threw them out, because the US dragged them out. They won't be able to defend you. Now, what the Danes are trying to do now, and Europe, by the way, is trying to do, NATO, but Europe in general is trying to do, is it's trying to say, well, we need to show that we can, in some way, shape or means, defend Denmark. So we'll send our troops in there. Penny Annie. You're not going to send troops there. But they're sending troops there, a couple there, just to suggest that we can. So, in other words, they're trying to cut off that avenue, because everybody knows how it's played. Everybody knows how the game's played. So you want to cut that avenue off from the populace and say to Greenlanders, you're not left alone, Greenlanders. We are looking after you. But what they can't do is they can't defeat the past. And that past history is going to keep coming up. I'm going to tell you that now. It's going to come up massively. And it's going to cause fizzes in society. And then they're going to sponsor their own party. Or a party that's closest to the United States will start to receive massive amounts of monies. And that party will then be able to, by spreading money around, or just by aiding and assisting individuals, will be able to get the votes from the people in that way. They will support people in Denmark who say, well, should we really still be holding on to colonial possessions? Why not sell it to the American? So they will be supported, right? This is how you're going to see it happening. It will happen. Now, the problem is this. Trump can't wait. So that process could take 10, 15 years. You see in Syria, the way the Yanks played it, took 15 years for that to happen. And for it to overthrow the Syrian government in that way. All these little bits that I said, sanctions, etc., paying over, feeding people, getting the right people in the right places. In the Ukraine, it took quite a long time as well. It took about 15 years, in Ukraine, to push that forward, to keep pushing it, to put people in. And if you want to go back, ever since the end of the Second World War, the Ukrainians have had stay-behinds, etc., been put in there, and those people have been put forward. So these are longevity processes, but Trump can't play longevity. So this is where the difference is going to lie. So Trump's going to have to make that happen quickly, and this is where he might make mistakes. And on the other hand, this is where military might come in. I said it wouldn't, but it could, because Trump can't wait. Trump knows that in his first time in office, he was stymied with a lot of things he wanted to do, which is why right now he has from day one gone out to do the most dastardly things straight away inside the United States and outside the United States. He's not hanging around. He figures, I'm guessing, that he might be a lame duck by the second year. So let's do everything in the first year and then potentially the second year. Let's get it hit quickly. So by the time we would have been a lame duck, we're no longer a lame duck because we've taken over the powers that be and the systems that be, which is why I was talking before about what is the constitutional position. So he's undermining the Constitution and trying to change the Constitution, which in America is quite difficult because people understand the Constitution. In Britain, actually, it's quite easy because people don't understand the Constitution, so you can do anything and suggest that it's right. Right. So this is the point that I'm making there, and why I bring these issues up, and this is why I'm hoping, coming towards the end of this discussion now, we're coming to bring all these little bits together so you can understand the picture that I'm trying to put forward. And the picture is that Donald Trump is not joking. Take Donald Trump at his word. Be respectful. President Donald Trump is not joking. Right? He has already telegraphed to everybody, I'm the biggest, baddest guy on the block. Whether he is or not is questionable because there's China and there's Russia now. But he's suggested that to people. NATO, read for that now, the EU and NATO, so close, I don't know the difference these days. I mean, it's incredible. The EU was a fantastic project that has now been totally and utterly undermined by the person they've put in charge as the president of the EU, who, to my mind, couldn't be doing any more than what she's doing on behalf of the United States if she was an agent of the CIA. She couldn't be doing more. She's basically got the EU kowtowing to every perspective of the United States. In a negative era of the United States, one could argue. If you're a Trump supporter, clearly not negative. If you're not a Trump supporter, it's clearly negative. So it depends on where you want to sit. But the point I'm saying is that the EU is now singing to every tune that we have. They've taken on this Ukraine thing. Ukraine is a disaster. It will fall apart. So they now don't want that to happen. Trump knows this. Trump has jumped away from it because at the end, when it does fall apart, you say, look, I give the Europeans all the assistance they needed to carry it out and make sure it was a victory. These guys lost it. I was winning it. I wouldn't have started it in the first place. But when I did, I was winning it when I was there. But then these fellas started it and they lost it. I give them everything. Right? That's what he's going to say. So that's why he's jumping away, because he knows it's gone. Any sensible type of people would jump away and know it's gone. But no, the EU is spending more and more and more and more money, which ties into NATO, because NATO's spending the money on the behalf of the EU, because frankly, the Russians are not fighting the Ukrainians, are fighting the EU, they're fighting NATO. And indeed, some of it, and don't get me wrong, this is provable because we say there is a collection of the will and it's 50 countries, NATO and others. So they aren't just fighting the Ukraine, they're fighting all these other countries. And some of these countries who went in the beginning with NATO, and now who are outside of NATO, are actually talking about, well, I don't know if I want to support this anymore because it's a dying cause, and half the money we sent's been stolen anyway, and half the weapons we sent has been sold off to some other people, etc., etc. So again, this is where you get it. But the EU is being true to this and never moving away, never giving you any other view than victory. So what will happen to it when the Ukraine is lost? What will it be able to say? Now, already we're trying to work our way through, but we're doing it in a dangerous way. In the United Kingdom, for example, we've said to all people up to the age of 65 who've been in the military, you are reservists, and in the case of war, you'll be called up. This is massive. Age of 65, you can be called up, right? Now, one of the problems is, and this is where you've got to look at the whole geopolitical field. One of the problems is I believe there's a massive disconnect now between governments and the militaries. In terms of, in the past, definitely when it was kings and queens and kings used to ride in front of the army and they'd fight the battles of the king of the country in front of them, there was a total unison between army, military, and the ruling elite, kings and queens. Right. Okay. When some of these kings and queens, like in Britain, became more of a figurehead of kings and queens with still power, because we swear allegiance to them if you're in the police, the intelligence, the military, whomever you are, you swear allegiance to the king and queen, whomever it might be at the time. So they've got some power. There is no power there, but that's supposedly not executive power. That's in the hands of the government. But the problem with governments now is that governmental individuals, and I use those words, governmental individuals, do not want to send their children to battle. So as a general rule, it's not positive anymore for your child, if you are an MP or whatever you are, and then you move up the ladder, you're under minister, a minister, a secretary of state, prime minister. It's not popular anymore that you have your children serving in the military. So therefore, there is a disconnect now. So I can easily send my military to fight a war if I've got no stake in it, in terms of none of my people are dying. And of course, it's an all-volunteer force. So they've chosen, and when they signed up, they knew they might die, so be it. So it's an easy position. It's not difficult. Not difficult for me to say, oh, I'll send troops to the Ukraine. If you're Great Britain, I'll send troops to the Ukraine. So, knowing that if war takes off, they'll all be slaughtered. Knowing it. But I'm not going to be affected by it because it's not my people. Right? This is a danger now. And this thing started happening in the United States in the Vietnam War, when there was all sorts of clauses put in place as to why, even though there was a draft, why your children, as ruling elite, were not going to fight in it. So when you look at the last presidents of the United States, including this one, Donald J. Trump, he found a way out of fighting in Vietnam. Bush found a way out of fighting in Vietnam. Clinton found a way out of fighting in Vietnam. Every last one of them didn't fight in Vietnam, even though there was a draft. Now, the heavyweight boxing champ of the world, who had no stake in the system whatsoever, because at the time, as I mentioned last week, he couldn't even sit down at a lunch counter in the state of the United States where he was from and eat a meal. He had to sit elsewhere because he was a black and they didn't like him around. They used a different word. I use the word black there, right? The law said this. They wanted that guy to fight. But people from wealthy families who had everything to win, so the Bush family example, had everything to come from, and indeed were getting stuff out of that war in Vietnam because they were running oil, etc., etc., their children weren't fighting. Right? Trump wasn't fighting. This is the point. That there is a disconnect between the military now and the classes that run the states. And that is a very dangerous thing. A very dangerous thing. So I'm bringing it all together. So why do I mention this? Because the last bit is, I'll just continue a little bit on the Iran aspect. Because by the time I finish this, which is on a Saturday, and I'm going to come out on Monday, there may already be war in Iran. But the Iranians have said that this time, if we are attacked, we will attack US bases in the region. And there are many and several. Several and many? There are many. Let's just leave it at that. There are many bases in the region. With actually quite a few United States military personnel. Interestingly, they haven't got the carrier fleets off the Mediterranean as they did before, or at least within distance of Iranian Iranian missiles, ballistic missiles. So therefore, I guess the naval aspect of them sinking, say, an aircraft carrier isn't in their mind. Unless, of course, they steam an aircraft carrier closer to the region, which they may do. But presently, I guess they're thinking we're out of the way. And it's a good thing that they're out of the way. They're going to argue, well, we're not running away. We're not standoff because we're frightened. We're away because we're doing actions in South America, in Venezuela. So, therefore, I'm guessing there's a lesser number. The Pentagon probably looking at it. The Department of War is probably looking at it in the United States saying, we can only lose these troops who are stationed on the ground, be it Air Force or be it Army. Potentially, no, not Marines, I wouldn't have thought, but Air Force and Army. And therefore, these are the numbers that we can lose. And maybe they think those numbers aren't that great. And again, notice how I say that. Because, of course, they probably don't have any people there. Trump doesn't have any people there for sure. Yeah, they're his family, so it's not a problem for him, is it? And most of those people who are in the Senate and are in the House of Representatives, and many of them don't have people there. Now, don't get me wrong, and people are going to mention it, there are people within, even with, like Tulsi Gabbard example, within, who has been sidelined, by the way, who are within the orbit of Trump's government, who are ex-military people. Absolutely they are. But they're out of the game, aren't they? Do they have children there? Who knows? And as far as Gabbard's concerned, she's one that isn't for attacking Iran. Because the military ones tend not to be so. Now, of course, the Hegseth and others are exceptions. The Minister of War, Secretary of State for War, he's exceptions. He was a junior officer and is drunk on the power and possibly even thinking, I'm going to show all those guys above me who looked down upon me when I was in the military that I'm now their boss and I'm going to kick their asses and I'm going to tell them what to do. I can imagine that's his sort of mentality. So to the point I'm making is this, is we're now in a situation where there's a disconnect between politicians and the military. So easier to send militaries in to fight or to have militaries die for a cause that you may think is purely political or necessary for the state. Intelligence services do as they are told as a general rule. Some may think that the CIA is out of control. I don't know. They will have opinions, but I'm guessing that their opinions may actually be the same as the present government in place in the US anyway. So it may be that they're happy with what they're doing in the intelligence services of the United States, particularly the CIA, but there are many others, as you know, in the US. So you've got that aspect. And then you've got the monetary element, the money men and women, the people, the captains of commerce, I'll leave you with this. It's quite interesting that, Trump said he wanted Venezuela for the oil, but then when he put it to the oil companies, many of them said, we don't want to invest there. What's the point? It's going to cost us too much. And we can't be sure that we're not going to get thrown out or that we're not going to inherit a state of revolution. Why would we want to be there? So what I'm saying to you is that is the position of Trump that you're not sure on. Because it's not just oil, is it? I'll say it again. It's not just oil. It's not just commerce. It's not just, let's say, people say he's beholden to the state of Israel. It's not just that he's beholden to the state of Israel. There's more to Trump than that. There's a bigger picture somewhere that relates to him as an individual, which is what makes it so difficult, because you don't know what he's going to do. And I can imagine for other world leaders, be they on the side of the United States, or be they the potential enemies of the United States, or stated enemies of the United States, because Trump doesn't care about stating as enemies, or calling them enemies, that they don't know what he's going to do. And in fact, his son said that. His son was at a conference in Kuwait, and he turned around and said, the beautiful thing about my father is you never know what he's going to do. Listen, that's not beautiful. Believe me, I've been in the political arena. For the political arena, that's the worst thing that you can have. Somebody who you do not know what his criteria is for any of his actions. So from one day to the next, it can change. That, my friends, is a recipe for disaster. And that's why I'm saying I cannot, hand on heart, rule out that Trump wouldn't turn around and say, Greenland isn't falling quick enough, let's take it by force of arms. Because it wouldn't be difficult. Frankly, it wouldn't at all be difficult. So maybe, just maybe, that's what he'll say. Because he does not care about losing NATO. Frankly, he had no interest in it, and he's only there, I believe, because some in his cabinet and in his system, and by system what I mean is make not the MAGA aspects of his system, but the, if you will, neocon aspect that wants to take most of the place and hold it on to the United States. Those aspects, those people within that area would think that the loss of NATO is a loss, I would imagine. Vast majority, not all, but vast majority. For MAGA, you could lose NATO tomorrow and they don't give a monkey's uncle. Indeed, NATO doesn't function without the United States. Doesn't function whatsoever without the United States. So it's no loss to them, right? So the fact that, and Article 5 nonsense, who's going to go up against the United States because it takes Greenland? Who's going to call on Article 5? Because the United States aren't going to take part in it. Where's your power? Where's your lift capability? By that I mean your Air Force lift of troops, capability to move troops around. But all that lift capability is the United States. So where is your capability to actually bring troops into Greenland in the first place, even if you wanted to fight them? So listen, there is no way that if they did that, and this is the problem, because Trump will know this, if they took it by force of arms, there is no way that NATO is going to do anything, the remnants of NATO. There is no capacity there, other than utilising the United States. So this is where the problem lies. So maybe he could. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I will say goodbye, and hopefully you'll be listening to me again next week. We'll have a completely different subject. But I also want you to think about, in the 7 days to the next pod, I want you to think about what I've said. And if you think it's trash, come back to me. Tell me what I'm saying is trash. If it's opened your eyes to a different way of thinking, please tell me that as well. Or don't tell me, but just get on and do. And by any means, get more people to subscribe. Please subscribe to the Black Spy podcast, because I'm trying to give you a real understanding of what goes on in the world. And for you, not anybody else, for you to make the decision as to whether you believe what you read, what you hear, what you see. For you to have your own fortitude and power. For you to use your brain, as Dr. Rachel would say, the elasticity of the brain that makes it easy just to believe, to actually think for yourself. And I'll leave you with that. See you again next week.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.